Join the quest today.
The mitzvah of tzitzit and teffilin are two of the most important mitzvot in the Torah, namely because they are done every single day. In the case of teffilin, 6 days of the week, not on Shabbat. In the case of tzitzit, every single day. And I'd like to demonstrate to you exactly how one fulfills these two mitzvot. There are a number of principles that apply that one should keep in mind when it comes to performing these mitzvot. First of all, they are both mitzvot that apply only during the daylight hours. So that means from a short time after dawn, right until sunset, one can fulfill these mitzvot. You can put on Tallis and teffilin. It doesn't have to be as part of a prayer service, although as a custom, we wear the talit and the teffilin in the morning service. Another few important principles. When it comes to putting on the Tallis and teffilin, there are two principles, halachic principles, that are in play. One of them is Malin b'kodesh v'lo moridin. That when it comes to matters of holiness, we always ascend. We go up in holiness and we do not go down. Now, how this applies to Tallis and teffilin is as follows. First, the Tallis is placed on, and then afterwards the teffilin. Why? Because we're going up in levels of holiness. The Tallis is an object that we use to perform a mitzvah. Teffilin, however, are of a higher sanctity because they contain within them Shemot Hashem, the names of God. So first one puts on the Tallis and then the teffilin. The second principle is Ein ma'avirin ala mitzvot. When it comes to mitzvot, when you have a number of mitzvot to do, you do not pass over one mitzvah to do another. The first one that comes to hand is the mitzvah that you must do. So therefore, you have to make sure that first the Tallis is available to you, then the teffilin worn on the arm, and then the teffilin that is worn on the head. The teffilin worn on the head is the most holy of all because it has 4 separate compartments, each of which contains scrolls, whereas the teffilin worn on the arm has only one compartment and a single scroll. Now, the demonstration will be according to Minhag Ashkenaz, the common custom that is kept by Jews of either Eastern or Western European descent. Usually what happens is when the time to put on Tallis and teffilin comes, before one puts on the Tallis, you will say what's called a kavanah, a meditation. This is something that is said quietly, and it focuses the mind. You can find it in each and every siddur, and it speaks about the concept of tzitzit. What is the purpose of this mitzvah? Why are we doing it? What should we keep in mind when we are about to fulfill the mitzvah of tzitzit? Before one puts on the Tallis, one has to examine the tzitzit to make sure that they are still kosher. Because they are threads, they are strings, they are prone to breaking quite easily, and the knots sometimes come undone. And therefore one begins by placing the Tallis over the shoulder and having a quick examination. This is not something that should take long, just a few seconds, to make sure that everything is intact. So in each of the 4 corners of the Tallis, one looks at the strings and looks for the following. Are there 5 sets of knots with 2 knots in each set? And are there 8 strings, 4 on each side? If you've had a cursory glance and everything seems to be in order, then you can begin to fulfill the mitzvah of Tallis. And the way in which it is done is that one puts it over one's head, lifts it up over the shoulders, throws it over the left shoulder, and at that point when one is wrapped in the Tallis, because the actual mitzvah is what's called ituf tzitzit, to wrap oneself in the Tallis, at that point one says the blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav v'tzivanu lehitatef b'tzitzit. Blessed are you, God, our King, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and commanded us to wrap ourselves in the tzitzit. When the tzitzit are wrapped around one's face, there are a few verses that have to be said, so it's a good idea to learn these off by heart. And once one has said that, then one takes the tallis off the head, off the face, and puts it on. And there is a unique way in which it must be worn. The main thing being that the tallis must be worn as a cape as opposed to a scarf. There are smaller tallisim, but the big tallis that is worn as a cape over each shoulder with 2 of the tzitzit in the front and 2 of the tzitzit in the back. After putting on the tallis, we then move to the teffilin. Once again, there is a kavanah, there's a meditation prayer, this time a little bit longer, that speaks about the teffilin. Where in the Torah do we find that teffilin are mentioned? There are 4 paragraphs. And in this prayer, we mention the different concepts in each one of these paragraphs. The fact that God took us out of Egypt, the fact that He sanctifies the firstborn, He took us out with a mighty arm and an outstretched hand. We speak about the fact that teffilin are mentioned in the Shema, the belief in God, love of God, fear of God, and that we are commanded to do His mitzvot. So once one says this meditation, he will then put on the teffilin shel yad, the arm teffilin. So it's important that these should be removed from the bag first. Now, the teffilin shel yad can be a little bit tricky to put on. And the way in which it's done is as follows. First of all, one exposes the arm, and one puts the teffilin on the bicep, about 2 fingers up from the elbow is the lowest point at which the teffilin must sit. And it should be worn in such a way that when one puts down one's arm, they are facing inward towards the heart. In fact, the Torah says that these words shall be upon your heart. A hint to the fact that the teffilin should be facing towards the heart. So once you've got them in the proper position and you're ready to tie the knot, you begin to tie the knot, and as you do so, you make the bracha. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kiddushanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu lahaniach tefillin. Blessed are you, God, our King, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with His commandments and has commanded us to place the teffillin, to put the teffillin on. Once one has said that blessing, one is not permitted to speak until one has concluded the mitzvah of teffillin. In other words, only after one has put the head teffillin on, because that blessing counts for both, even though there is a unique and special blessing that is recited for the head teffillin. So one then begins to tie the teffillin around the arm, and one makes 7 coils around the arm, and then one comes to the hand and just merely wraps it around the hand. Leaves it like that until after the head teffillin have been put on. Now you can actually see the difference between the arm teffillin and the head teffillin just by looking at them. The arm teffillin is a single box. It also has a unique shaped knot that looks like the letter Yud. The head teffillin is again a box, but this time with 4 separate compartments. So you can see this from the outside, and on either side of those compartments is the letter Shin. In one case the Shin has 3 heads, and in the one case it has 4 heads. So it's very clear the difference between the teffillin from the outside. Also, the teffillin that are worn on the head have a unique knot. In some teffillin it's a single knot that looks like a dalet. In other cases it is a knot that looks like 2 dalets, a double dalet knot. So one takes the teffillin of the head and places it over the head, and again this can be a little bit tricky because it has to be worn in the exact right position. And therefore, it's not a one-size-fits-all. If you're borrowing teffillin or you just got a new pair of teffillin, it's very important that this has to be adjusted to your head. Because again, everybody has a different sized head and it has to be worn precisely in the right location. The knot of the teffillin should touch the back of the head, just where you feel that small indentation. And the front part of the teffillin, the bayit, the actual compartment, must sit just above the hairline, or for those gentlemen who have no hair anymore, where the hairline used to be. The teffillin should not be worn here in the forehead. And they should be positioned so that they are exactly between the eyes. Again, this can be tricky. To ensure that your teffillin are in the proper position, one can make use of a mirror. Many of the sofrim, the scribes, will sell you, together with your teffillin, a small little mirror, and you can merely examine whether the teffillin are above the hairline and exactly between the eyes. Because the Torah says that they have to be bein einechem, between the eyes. That does not mean that the actual box is between the eyes, but they're above the hairline in the area between the eyes. If you don't have a mirror, you can ask one of your friends to make sure that you are wearing your teffillin in the correct position. Now, when you're putting the head teffilin on, you have to make sure that there is nothing between the teffilin and your body. And the same applies to the teffilin worn on the arm, that they should go directly onto the skin. There should be nothing between the teffilin, what we call a chatzitza, a break between the teffilin and the skin. So one must make sure that there's no shirt in the way, jewelry, whatever it may be. The same thing applies to the teffilin worn on the head. So when you're putting it on, perhaps the idea is to lift up the kippah, the yarmulke, to make sure that the teffilin is sitting on your hair, and then afterwards to put the kippah back on. When one is putting on the teffilin of the head, one says the following blessing. Baruch atah Adonai Eloheinu melech haolam, asher kideshanu b'mitzvotav, v'tzivanu al mitzvat teffilin. Blessed are you, Hashem, our God, Master of the universe, who has sanctified us with these commandments and commanded us regarding the mitzvah of teffilin. After you've put on the teffilin properly and it's correctly adjusted so that the compartment is sitting just above the hairline and the knot is just on the little indentation on the back of the head, then you make sure that the straps are coming either side of you, the longer strap on the right side, the shorter strap on the left side, with the black side facing forward. Once the teffilin is all correct and in the right place, one says the following phrase, Baruch Shem Kavod Malchuto Le'olam Va'ed. Now one can go back to the arm teffilin. Now if you remember, the arm teffilin was wound around the arm 7 times, and then it was put around the hand. So what one does now is one unwinds these straps that were on the hand and winds it around one's finger. Not unlike the way in which one would put on a wedding band. And in this case, 3 bands. So 3 times on the middle finger, and then around the hand to form the shape of the letter Shin. And when one is winding the strap around the middle finger, you say verses from the prophet, and these verses speak about marriage. God uses a metaphor of betrothing the Jewish people to himself. And he says the word ve'erastich, I will betroth you to me. He says it 3 times. So as we are making those winds around the middle finger, we say those phrases and we say that word ve'erastich, I will betroth you to me forever, with faith, with love, 3 times. Once that is done, one has now fulfilled the mitzvah of Tallis and teffilin. When one has completed the mitzvah, or one has come to the end of the morning service, you will remove the Tallis and the teffilin and you will go backwards to the way in which you put it on. So in other words, the last thing that you did was to wind the teffilin around the finger and the hand. This will be the first thing that you do. Then you'll take off the head teffilin and wind it up. There are many different customs as to how one winds it up, but you will wind up the head teffilin and then place it back in its container. Then take off the arm teffilin, wrap it up and put it back in the container. And you have to put it back into the container, whether it's a velvet bag or some other container, in such a way that you will remove the arm teffilin first and then take out the head teffilin. Again, keeping in mind the principle of ein ma'avirin ala mitzvot, that we do not pass over a mitzvah, and the first one that comes to hand is the mitzvah that we do. And because we have to put on the arm teffilin first, one must make sure that it's put in the bag in such a way that that is the first one that you encounter. Once you've wrapped up your teffilin, then you take off the talit, you fold that, and you put it back into the bag. And it's customary to have very nice containers, such as velvet bags, to keep one's teffilin and one's tallis in a good condition. So this is how we go about fulfilling these important daily mitzvot of wearing tallis, tzitzit, and teffilin.